Ah, Spain, the first empire upon which the sun never set. One cannot help but admire the sheer ambition of the Spaniards during the 16th century. In the span of mere decades, the Spanish monarchy turned from a fractured feudal power into the owner of the largest colonial empire on earth, with literal mountains of silver in their treasury. In the wake of such achievements, we can hardly blame the Spanish kings for thinking that they could truly conquer the world. But the true scale of their ambition can only be appreciated if we look at the insane, yet seemingly plausible plan of the Spanish to conquer China. Now, it is worth noting that the Spanish monarchy at the time was ruled not by a Spanish dynasty, but by the Habsburgs, who famously married their way into almost every European throne at some point or another. It was a long-time dream of the Habsburgs to create a single universal monarchy for all of Christendom. But they were having quite a bit of trouble with that task in Europe, with Protestant England, the Calvinist Dutch, and the Muslim Ottomans waging almost continuous war against Spain from the 1560s onwards. Outside of Europe, however, Spain had much more success. With incredibly small armies, the Spanish conquistadors had conquered the major civilizations of the Americas and were well on their way to converting them to Christianity and making them into loyal Spanish subjects. From their new American colonies, the Spaniards then managed to sail across the Pacific to colonize the Philippines, establishing what is arguably the first truly global trade route in history. From Manila, Spanish traders had access to China, from where they could buy silk, porcelain, and spices with their newfound American silver. The Chinese were always desperate for silver, by pure historical coincidence. The Ming dynasty, which had taken over from the Mongols 2 centuries prior, had initially tried to implement paper money. But it was a bit too early for that particular innovation, so their currency collapsed, and they instead decided to use silver, making it much more precious there than in Europe. The Spaniards would buy whatever luxuries they could from China with their endless supply of American silver, then ship the goods through the Philippines and Mexico to Europe. The returns from this trade route were incredible, as much as 300% per voyage, and it ran continuously for 2.5 centuries, right up until Mexico gained its independence. It is these truly eye-watering profits that got the Spanish in Manila thinking, why should they just trade away their silver to China? After all, had the Spanish been content with just trading with the Aztecs and the Incas, there would be no Spanish America. So conquest was clearly preferable to trade. And by cutting out the middleman, that pesky Chinese emperor, Spain would gain control of the most productive supply chain on Earth, right at the source. But speaking of cutting out the middleman, our good friends over at Raycon, who were kind enough to sponsor this video, are doing just that to the global earbuds industry. With Raycon's essential open earbuds, you get the same premium sound at a fraction of the price, all while staying aware of your surroundings. A feature that has already saved my life multiple times when walking to the gym through London's dreadful traffic. My Raycons are incredibly lightweight and carry 36 hours of battery life, so I only need to charge my case once a week, despite the heavy usage I put them through. And their rotating multi-angular hook has kept them in my ear, even through the fanciest of my gymnastics routines. More than 3 million people have already made the switch, and best of all, as a special courtesy to SideQuest viewers, you can get Raycon's essential open earbuds for 20% off. Just visit buyraycon.com/sidequestopen or click the link in the description to make your spring season sound a lot better. What also sounded very good was China's promise of near infinite wealth. In fact, this allure proved so tempting that nearly every Spanish diplomat, governor, and clergyman in Manila made some form of proposal for the conquest of China. King Philip II was inclined to entertain these proposals. After all, it was after him that the Philippines were named, and he voraciously read all reports from the islands. Yet, for him, what really mattered was bringing Christianity to China. He was a very pious king, seeing himself as the defender of all Catholics, and he was absolutely determined to save China's vast population from eternal damnation. Luckily, the Philippine governors had a very strong religious argument for invading China. The Ming Emperor forbade Spanish missionaries from preaching the Gospels, so they couldn't convert the Chinese peacefully. Therefore, they argued that it was Spain's divine duty to forcefully open China's doors to the Word of God. The plan to invade China was given even more support by another lucky circumstance, this time much closer to home. In 1580, the old Portuguese king died without any direct heirs, and while Philip II was third in line behind his distant cousins, he decided to expedite his candidacy. Thus, after a brief war, Philip II of Spain became Philip I of Portugal, bringing together the world's two largest colonial empires under one crown. This Iberian union presented a lucrative stepping stone for the Spanish conquest of China in the form of Macau. The Spaniards now had access to the Portuguese colony right next to China's southern administrative center of Canton, which would make an ideal staging ground for an invasion along the Pearl River. This fact was universally recognized by the Spaniards in the Philippines as a sign from God endorsing their invasion. A grand convention was held in Manila in 1586, and a detailed proposal was drafted for the invasion of China. The plan called for 10,000 troops to be assembled from mainland Spain, alongside 6,000 native Filipino warriors and another 6,000 Christian samurai from Japan. Yes, unlike China, the Japanese had allowed Christian missionaries into their country, and by the 1580s, their numbers were large enough to enter into an alliance with Spain. This multi-ethnic invasion force was to seize southern China out of Macau, then march to Beijing to force the Chinese emperor into submission to the Spanish crown. On paper, it was exactly the same plan that had toppled the Aztecs and the Incas, so the Spaniards were certain it would work. Then, once the Chinese population had been Christianized, Spain could launch a crusade across Asia, ultimately opening up a second front against the Ottoman Empire. Preparations for the invasion of China commenced before the plan had even reached King Philip in Madrid. After all, letters back then could take a full year to circumnavigate the globe. The Philippine governor was buying weapons and ammunition, making alliances, and fortifying Manila for almost 2 years before he got the king's response. Ironically, since Spain and Mexico were very far away, the invasion supplies were almost exclusively sourced from China itself by willing merchants who were oblivious to Spain's plans. Unfortunately, when the Philippine governor finally received King Philip's response in 1588, the answer was a resounding no. You see, while the Philippines were gearing up for invasion, the Spanish crown had made offensive plans of its own. King Philip had assembled a grand fleet, the famous Spanish Armada, to once and for all defeat England and restore Catholicism to its wayward subjects. Unfortunately for Philip, his armada was defeated in 4 short skirmishes, and then most of it was destroyed by Atlantic storms on the way back to Spain. So, with his navy in tatters and England preparing an armada of its own to counter-invade Spain, King Philip could scarcely afford sending 10,000 men halfway across the world to China. And so, King Philip instructed the Philippines to maintain peaceful trade with China, much to the angst of the Spaniards there, but very much to the delight of his new Portuguese subjects, who very well understood that Spain had no chance of actually conquering China. Unlike the Aztecs and Incas, who were stuck in the Stone Age, Ming China was at the forefront of civilization, both in terms of numbers and quality. Lest we forget, it was the Chinese who invented gunpowder, and the Ming had a standing army of over 1 million soldiers and enough walled cities to make any conquistador blush. One might argue that yes, the Ming armies were unmotivated, untrained, and under-equipped, due to rampant corruption and Chinese culture treating soldiers as the very bottom of the social hierarchy. But even if the Spanish had captured Canton, with its great walls that no Spanish cannon could penetrate, they would have found it totally impossible to hold and manage the vast lands of China with a pitiful force of 20,000. As an example of just how impossible conquering Ming China would be, the Japanese would try a similar venture a mere decade later, with over 150,000 men and 1,000 ships landing in Korea to move into China. Yet, even though Japan was a lot closer to China than Spain was, and had come knocking with 10 times as many soldiers, the invasion never made it past Korea, and ultimately almost everyone died. So it is probably good that King Philip called the whole invasion off, as his forces would have suffered the same fate, and then we wouldn't have all those wonderful casinos in Macau today. In any case, thank you for watching, my friends. If you enjoyed this brief tour of Spain's grandomanic fantasies, consider supporting us on Patreon. Make sure to like and subscribe, and leave a comment down below about which topic you want us to cover next. Don't forget to check out our friends over at Raycon, and stay tuned for the next delusionally ambitious episode of SideQuest. Why did the Spanish laugh at the Ming's navy? They heard it was all junks.